3 years after my wife's funeral, I heard her laugh in the cereal aisle of a Walmart in Chattanooga. I know how that sounds. I know exactly how that sounds. But I need you to stay with me, because what happened next changed every single thing I thought I knew about my life. Let me know where you're watching from and what time it is there before I get into this. I want to know you're out there. My wife died in a house fire on a Tuesday morning in October, 3 years ago. That's what the fire marshal's report said. That's what the death certificate said. That's what I told myself every single morning when I woke up alone in my brother's spare bedroom for 4 months before I could stand to go back to any place that felt like home. The fire started in the kitchen. A grease fire, they said. The back half of our house in Maryville burned hot and fast before the trucks got there. They found remains in the master bedroom. Carol, they told me, had probably tried to escape the smoke and didn't make it. The remains were consistent with a woman her age and size. The dental records were close enough. I buried what they gave me in a mahogany casket at Grandview Cemetery, and I stood in the November rain with my daughter on one side and my son-in-law on the other, and I cried until I thought something inside me had permanently broken. I was 62 years old. I had been married for 38 years, and just like that, I wasn't anymore. For the first year, I did what people told me to do. Grief counseling on Thursdays, church on Sundays. I sold the rebuilt house because I couldn't sleep in it, and I bought a small ranch off Route 11 outside Maryville. I took on part-time electrical work to keep my hands busy, because my hands had always known what to do even when my head didn't. My daughter called every few days. My son-in-law, Derek, came around on weekends sometimes, fixed things that didn't need fixing, offered to help with the yard. He was attentive in a way that felt like something other than kindness, though I couldn't have told you then what I meant by that. By the second year, I had settled into a kind of gray, functional existence. Not happy, not falling apart, just moving. The grief had gone underground, the way grief does, and I had learned to step around it without looking down. The morning I saw her, I had driven up to Chattanooga to pick up a specialty circuit panel for a job I was finishing near Ooltewah. The electrical supply house didn't open until 9, so I stopped at the Walmart on Highway 153 to grab coffee and a few things for the house. It was a Wednesday, 7:40 in the morning. I remember the time because I had checked my watch in the parking lot. I was in the breakfast aisle looking at oatmeal when I heard it. That laugh. Carol's laugh had always been unmistakable to me, a short, bright sound that went up at the end like a question. I'd heard it 1,000 times, over 38 years, at dinner tables, in the car, through closed doors when she was on the phone. I stood there holding a blue canister of quick oats, and the sound went straight through me like a current. I set the oats down and I walked toward it. She was 2 aisles over, in the cereal section, with a man I didn't know. She had cut her hair shorter and dyed it darker, closer to brown than the auburn she'd always kept. She was wearing a green cardigan I had never seen. She was thinner, but the way she stood, the way she tilted her whole body when she laughed, the way her right hand went to her collarbone when something struck her as funny, that was Carol. That was my wife. The man with her was tall, early 60s, silver hair kept neat. He handed her a box of granola and she shook her head and put it back on the shelf, still smiling. He took her hand. She let him. I must have made a sound. She turned. For 1 second, her eyes met mine across the aisle, and everything in her face went absolutely still. Not confused, not the polite blankness of a stranger who's been stared at. Still, the way a person goes still when they've been caught. Then she looked away, said something quietly to the man beside her, and walked in the other direction. I followed her to the end of the aisle. By the time I got there, she had turned the corner, and they were moving fast toward the front of the store. I wasn't running. My legs weren't cooperating the way I needed them to. I made it to the front in time to see them go through the doors. I went after them. In the parking lot, she didn't look back. They walked quickly to a dark green SUV parked near the cart return. Tennessee plates. I got close enough to read the number before he pulled out. I stood on the warm asphalt with the number written on the back of my hand in pen from my shirt pocket, and I watched that green SUV drive east on Highway 153 until I couldn't see it anymore. I sat in my truck for 45 minutes before I drove to the supply house. I don't remember the drive. I picked up the panel. I drove home. I sat in my driveway until dark. The fire had been ruled accidental. The death certificate said Carol Marie Harlan. Date of death, October 14th. I had believed every word of it because my son-in-law had handled most of the details, and because I had been in no condition to handle anything myself. Derek had been the one who identified the remains when they asked for family. He had told me it was better if I didn't have to go through that. He had been so certain, so steady, while I was falling apart, that I had been grateful to him. That night, sitting in my driveway, I let myself think the thought I had been pushing away for hours. Derek knew. I didn't sleep. At 5 in the morning, I drove to Knoxville and waited outside a private investigation office on Cumberland Avenue until a man named Ray Dobbins arrived at 8:15. I had found him online the night before. 22 years with the Knox County Sheriff's Department. Retired. Now working cases on his own. His reviews were plain and direct, which is what I wanted. I told him everything. He listened with his hands flat on his desk and didn't interrupt once. When I finished, he asked me 2 questions. Was I sure about the laugh? And was I sure about the way she went still when she saw me? I said yes to both. He leaned back. Most people who come in here, he said, they want me to tell them they're wrong. You're not asking me that. No, I said. I'm asking you to find out where she went. He took the license plate number. He told me a week to 10 days and a $1,500 retainer. I wrote the check before I left his office. I went home and I thought about my daughter. She had adored her mother. If Carol was alive and Amy didn't know, this was going to devastate her. And if Amy did know, that thought I couldn't finish. I thought about Derek, the way he had steered me away from the casket viewing. We should remember her the way she was, Frank. That's what he'd said. I had thought he was being kind. On day 6, Ray called. Come by the office, he said. I've got enough. The folder he put in front of me was 40 pages. He walked me through it methodically, the way a man does when he's spent 30 years presenting evidence. The green SUV was registered to a Paul Whitaker, 61, retired civil engineer, currently residing in a rental property outside Cleveland, Tennessee, 30 miles from where I had seen her in that Walmart. He had moved there 14 months ago from Murfreesboro, where he had lived for the previous 8 years. In Murfreesboro, his listed cohabitant on a lease renewal signed 3 years and 2 months ago was a woman named Linda Marsh. Ray turned to the next page. Linda Marsh had a Tennessee driver's license issued 4 years ago. The photo was Carol. Different hair, same face, same eyes, same small scar at the corner of her left eye where she had caught a cabinet door in 2008. Linda Marsh had a social security number that Ray had run through 2 different databases. It was a real number, belonging originally to a woman named Linda Marsh, who had died in Shelby County in 1987 at the age of 6 months. A dead infant's identity. It's one of the oldest methods in the book, Ray said. Simple, effective. You just have to know someone who knows how to find the right records. I stared at the photo on the license. Carol Marie Harlan, wearing a stranger's name, looking directly into a camera. There's more, Ray said. He had pulled the fire marshal's original report and cross-referenced it with the county medical examiner's case file. The remains recovered from the bedroom had been identified based on dental records submitted by the family dentist. Ray had contacted that dentist's former office. The practice had changed hands 18 months after the fire. Records had been transferred, but Ray had a contact at the new practice who confirmed that the original X-rays submitted for comparison during the identification had been brought in by a family member, not retrieved directly from the dentist's office the way the standard process required. The family member was listed as the son-in-law. Derek had provided the dental records. Derek had controlled what the examiner compared. Whatever those X-rays showed, he had chosen what to hand over. Ray set down his pen. I can't prove to you right now exactly whose remains were in that bedroom. That's a matter for law enforcement, not for me. But I can tell you that the identification process had enough irregularities that the right prosecutor would have questions. I sat very still. Who did we bury? I said. That's the question, Ray said quietly. That's exactly the question. I drove home in the kind of calm that isn't calm at all. It's the place past shock where everything goes very precise and very cold and you start thinking in straight lines. My son-in-law had helped my wife disappear. He had managed the identification, controlled the paperwork, kept me away from anything that might have let me see the truth. He had been at my side at the funeral with his hand on my shoulder. I needed him to say it out loud. I had a small digital recorder I had bought years ago to document site conditions on electrical jobs. I found it in my work bag that night and tested the battery. I called Derek the next morning and asked if he could come by Saturday. Said I needed help moving some things in the garage. He said of course. He was always going to say of course. Saturday he arrived at 10. I had arranged nothing in the garage. I had put 2 chairs at my kitchen table and made a pot of coffee, and when he came inside I told him to sit down. He looked at the chairs, then at me. Something moved across his face. I was in Chattanooga last Wednesday, I said. He wrapped both hands around the mug I set in front of him. I saw her, I said, at the Walmart on 153. I followed her to the parking lot and I wrote down the plate number of the car she left in. I've already had someone run it. I know about Paul Whitaker. I know about Linda Marsh. I know you're the one who brought the dental records to the examiner's office. He didn't say anything for a long time. He stared at the table. I need you to tell me everything, I said, and I need it to be the truth this time, because I am going to find it out regardless, and the only variable here is whether you help me find it or whether you make me dig for it. His voice when it came out was very quiet. He had known for 5 years. Carol had told him herself. Come to him because she felt she had no one else. She had been seeing Paul Whitaker for 6 years at that point. She wanted out of the marriage but didn't know how to leave without losing the house, the retirement accounts, the savings, Tennessee divorce law, community property, 38 years of shared assets. She had done the math and she didn't like the numbers. The plan had taken 2 years to build. She found someone, Derek wouldn't tell me how, who helped create the Linda Marsh identity. Real documents. A real deceased person's social security number, a driver's license, eventually a passport. She opened accounts under the new name slowly, over 3 years, moving small amounts at a time. Then there was the fire. The fire wasn't accidental. She had planned it for a Tuesday morning, when she knew I had an early job in Oak Ridge and would be gone before 6. She needed remains. The alternative to a body is a fire hot enough and complete enough that remains can't be fully identified. She had arranged for a woman. Derek paused here for a long time. An elderly woman whose family had placed her in a nursing home in Maryville. A woman whose family had a significant debt to someone connected to all of this. To be in the house when it burned. I put my hand flat on the table. I need you to say that again. His voice dropped to nearly nothing. There was a woman in the house when it burned. I stood up. My chair hit the wall behind me. There is a woman buried in my wife's grave. He was crying now. He said he hadn't known about the woman until after it was done. That Carol had told him there would be remains and he needed to handle the identification. But he hadn't known where the remains would come from until it was over and he was already in it. I believed him that he hadn't known. I also knew it didn't matter much what he'd known or when. I want her name, I said. The woman, he told me. Edna Rawlings, 81. Dementia. She had been moved out of the nursing home 2 days before the fire by a family member with power of attorney. I walked to the back door and stood there with my hand on the frame looking at my yard until I could breathe normally again. Then I turned around and came back to the table. Tell me the rest. The accounts, the money. Over 3 years before the fire, Carol had moved $140,000 out of our joint savings. $10,000 here, $8,000 there. Never enough at one time to trigger a flag. The retirement accounts he couldn't touch without my signature. But a week before the fire, she had cashed out her own IRA, $92,000, paid the early withdrawal penalty, and wired it to an account in Linda Marsh's name. She also had a life insurance policy I didn't know about. A policy in my name as the beneficiary, worth $250,000. She had named Derek as the secondary beneficiary and as the authorized representative. When she died, the payout went to him. He had kept $50,000 and put $200,000 into an account he set up for her under a shell company name. That's $482,000, I said. He nodded. And you kept $50,000 of it. He couldn't look at me. My daughter, I said. Does she know? No. He said it fast and he held my eyes when he said it the first time he'd done that. Amy doesn't know anything. I never told her. I have never told her a word of this. I looked at him for a long time. Then I told him to go home. I told him I would be in touch. I kept my voice level all the way to the door. When I heard his truck back out of the driveway, I took the recorder out of my shirt pocket and pressed stop. I called Ray Dobbins that afternoon. He connected me with a woman named Sandra Moss, a criminal attorney out of Knoxville with 20 years of experience in fraud cases and 3 years as an assistant district attorney before that. She had short gray hair, reading glasses on a chain, and the kind of directness that makes you feel like you're finally talking to someone who won't waste your time. She listened to the recording. She listened to it twice. Then she set down her pen and told me what we were looking at. Insurance fraud, identity fraud, conspiracy to commit fraud, falsification of official records, and depending on what law enforcement found when they looked at the nursing home paperwork and who had moved Edna Rawlings and under what circumstances, potentially felony murder. She said that last part carefully. Carol could face 20 years minimum, probably more, depending on the murder charge. Derek, as an accessory after the fact who received proceeds from the fraud and helped execute the false identification, was looking at 8 to 12. I want everything recovered, I told her. Every dollar. And I want them to answer for Edna Rawlings. Sandra nodded. Then we need to go to the FBI. This crosses state lines with the wire transfers. That makes it federal. Do it, I said. The next 3 weeks were the longest of my life, and I have had some long ones. Sandra coordinated with a federal agent out of the Knoxville field office, a methodical man named Gareth Cole who spoke slowly and asked very precise questions and made me tell the whole story 3 times from different starting points. Ray's documentation went into the case file. The recorder went into evidence. Bank records were subpoenaed. The nursing home in Sevierville was contacted about Edna Rawlings. Sandra kept me informed but told me to stay home and stay quiet. Don't talk to Derek, she said. Don't reach out to Carol through any channel. Don't tell anyone except your daughter. My daughter? I had to tell her. I drove to her house on a Tuesday evening. She met me at the door, knew immediately from my face that something was badly wrong. We sat at her kitchen table, the same way I had sat with Derek, and I told her everything, all of it, from the Walmart to the recording to Sandra's office. I watched my daughter's face while I talked. I watched her go through 5 or 6 different expressions in the space of an hour, and I could not have named all of them. When I finished, she sat quietly for a moment. Where is she now? Amy said. Cleveland, Tennessee. About 30 miles from here. Amy looked at her hands. Dad, she said. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. You didn't know. I should have asked more questions. I always thought something was strange about how quickly he took over everything after the fire. I asked him about it once, and he said he just wanted to protect you, and I let it go. We sat there together, mother and daughter, her mother, my wife, a woman we had both built our lives around, a woman who had looked at those lives and decided they weren't what she wanted anymore and had chosen this instead. The arrests came on a Friday morning. Agent Cole called me at 7:15. It's in motion, he said. That was all. Derek was taken from his office parking lot at 8 o'clock. Amy called me 20 minutes after that, voice flat and steady in a way that told me she was working very hard to keep it that way. They just took him, she said. He didn't say anything. He just looked at me and he didn't say anything. Carol, who was still living as Linda Marsh in the rental outside Cleveland, was arrested at a gas station at 8:45. She had been filling up the green SUV when 2 federal agents approached her. Paul Whitaker was in the passenger seat. According to the report Agent Cole shared with me later, she gave them a false name at first. They called it by what it was. Sandra called me at noon. It's done. All 3 accounts are frozen. The house in Cleveland is seized. They've issued a warrant for the individual who handled the nursing home paperwork, and the Sevierville PD is cooperating with the Edna Rawlings investigation. I went out to my back porch and I sat down in a chair and I looked at my yard for a long time. The mountains in the distance, pale blue and quiet. October light, the same month she had burned our house down 3 years ago. I thought about Edna Rawlings, 81 years old. Whatever had been done to her and however it had been arranged, she had ended up in the remains of my bedroom, and her family had spent 3 years not knowing what had happened to her. Her family, someone out there who had loved her the way I had loved Carol. I thought about that for a long time. I was in the Clark County courtroom when Derek stood before the judge 4 months later. He had taken a plea arrangement, 7 years in Tennessee State Prison, eligible for consideration after 4, in exchange for full cooperation and testimony against Carol. He stood very straight. He didn't look at Amy, who was seated 2 rows behind me with her hands folded in her lap. "I know I can't undo what I did," he said, when the judge gave him the opportunity to speak. "I know there is nothing I can say to Frank. But I want the court to know that Amy had no knowledge of any of this. She is completely innocent." The judge acknowledged it. Amy and Derek made eye contact for 1 second when they let him out. Then she looked straight ahead. Carol's trial took 4 days. The prosecution's case was thorough. Ray's documentation, the banking records, the identity documents, Derek's full testimony, which he gave without looking at her. The nursing home records showing that a family member with power of attorney had removed Edna Rawlings 2 days before the fire. A forensic accountant who walked the jury through 4 years of fund movements. And my testimony. I walked to the stand and I looked at Carol for the first time since the cereal aisle of that Walmart. She was in a gray suit. Her hair had grown out and was graying at the roots now, returning to something closer to what I remembered. She met my eyes. I spoke for 40 minutes. I talked about 38 years. I talked about the work I had put into our house, our savings, our life. I talked about standing in November rain at a cemetery crying for a woman who was alive and building a new life 30 miles away. I talked about Edna Rawlings, whose name I said clearly and carefully so the jury would hear it and not let it get lost in the fraud charges. Her family deserves to hear that name said out loud in a courtroom. I told the jury, whatever else this case is about, Edna Rawlings was a person, and she mattered. Carol looked at the table. Paul Whitaker testified on the second day. He had cooperated fully with investigators in exchange for immunity. He had known Carol as Linda for 6 years before the fire and had believed entirely in the identity she had constructed. He was not involved in the planning. He had met her in Murfreesboro through a mutual acquaintance and had built what he believed was a legitimate relationship with a widow from Nashville who had moved there for a fresh start. He looked like a man who had been taken apart and reassembled slightly wrong. I felt for him genuinely. He was a victim, too, just a different kind. The jury deliberated for most of 1 day. Guilty on all counts. At sentencing, the judge was measured and careful. She spoke about the nature of the fraud, the complexity of the scheme, the length of time it had operated. Then she spoke about Edna Rawlings. The investigation into the circumstances of Miss Rawlings' death remains ongoing, she said. The court notes the serious nature of the involvement suggested by the evidence and has taken it into full consideration. Carol Marie Harlan received 22 years in the Tennessee Department of Correction. She would not be eligible for parole consideration for the first 14. The financial restitution order was for $482,000 plus interest and legal costs to be satisfied through asset seizure. They led her out past my row. She didn't turn. Outside the courthouse, Sandra shook my hand. It was a good outcome, Frank. I know that's a strange word for all of this, but it was. I know, I said. Thank you. My daughter was waiting by my truck. We drove to a diner on the edge of town and ordered coffee, and neither of us said much for a while. Eventually she said, "Where do we go from here?" "I've been thinking about that," I told her. "I've been thinking about it quite a bit." What I'd been thinking was this. The money, when the seizure and restitution process completed 8 months later, totaled just under $400,000 after legal costs. Sandra helped me structure it properly. $250,000 went into a conservative account, generating enough monthly income to cover my expenses without touching the principal. $75,000 I donated, split between an elder abuse prevention organization in Tennessee and a fund I helped establish in Edna Rawlings' name through her church in Sevierville, which her family attended. I met her daughter once, briefly, in a courthouse hallway. We didn't say much. There wasn't much that words could reach. The rest I kept accessible, in case I needed it. Because I had learned not to assume I knew what was coming, I went back to part-time electrical work. Small jobs, residential mostly, older homes in Maryville and the surrounding towns where the wiring needed careful hands and patience. I liked the work. I had always liked the work. There was something honest about it. You either did it right or the lights didn't come on. No ambiguity. My daughter and I had dinner every Sunday. That was the new arrangement, non-negotiable, established by her. She was navigating her own wreckage, the end of her marriage, the reconstruction of what she thought she'd known about her family, the slow work of separating who she was from all of it. She was doing it with more steadiness than I would have at her age. Derek wrote me a letter from the prison in Pikeville. 3 pages, handwritten. I read it all the way through, and then I sat with it for several days. There was genuine remorse in it, or what read like genuine remorse. There was also the particular language of a man who is trying to explain himself in a way that reduces his culpability, even when he doesn't mean it to. I wrote back a single paragraph. I told him I had read his letter. I told him that forgiveness was not something I was in a position to offer him yet, and I wasn't going to pretend otherwise. I told him that if he was a different man when he came out, there might be a conversation to be had. I sealed it and sent it, and didn't think about whether he'd write back. The letters from the Tennessee Department of Correction began coming about 6 months after sentencing. Carol's handwriting on the envelopes. I recognized it immediately. The particular way she made her F's and her lowercase e's, a handwriting I had read on birthday cards and grocery lists and notes left on the kitchen counter for 38 years. I didn't open them. I'm not saying that was the righteous choice or the healed choice or whatever you want to call it. I'm just telling you what I did. I put them in a shoebox on the shelf in my hall closet, and I left them there. Some doors need to stay closed for a while before you know whether to open them. Maybe that door opens eventually. Maybe it doesn't. What I do know, standing in my workshop on a Saturday morning with sawdust on my boots and good mountain light coming through the window, is this. I am 64 years old. I spent 38 years building a life I turned out to be building alone without knowing it. That's a hard thing to absorb, and I won't pretend I have absorbed all of it yet. Some mornings I am fine, and some mornings it comes back fresh, and I have to let it move through me before I can pick up my tools. But I am here. I am in a house that is mine, doing work that is honest, having dinner with my daughter on Sundays, drinking coffee at 6 in the morning while the mountains go from gray to gold and I don't have to explain myself to anyone. People ask me if I'm angry. I was. I was angry the way I have never been angry about anything else in my life. But anger is expensive to carry, and I am not made of money. What I am is clear. Clear about what I will and won't accept. Clear about what I see when I look at a person. Clear about the difference between trust that's earned and trust that's just habit. That kind of clarity cost me most of my adult life to acquire. I wish it hadn't cost me what it did. But I have it now, and no one can take it back. I will tell you the same thing I told my daughter over coffee one Sunday morning when she asked me how I was really doing. I said, Amy, I am not the man who buried a stranger and called it grief. I am not the man who couldn't see what was right in front of him. I don't know exactly who I am yet, but I know what I'm not. And at 64 years old, after everything, that's enough of a starting place. It's never too late to see clearly. It's never too late to stand up. And it's never too late to decide that your life, the real one, still belongs to you. That's what this story cost me. That's what it taught me. And I wouldn't trade the teaching, even if I could undo the cost. If this reached you today, if something in it landed somewhere real for you, hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Leave me a comment and tell me where you're watching from. Tell me your time and your town and a little of what you're carrying. I read every single one. We're all out here carrying something. Might as well carry it together. God bless you. Take care of yourselves. And remember, the truth always finds a way out. Always.